Welcome back to Nazir Fears, where fear becomes reality. Tonight, we're diving into the horrifying truth behind 3 bone-chilling Home Alone experiences. These are not your average ghost stories. These are true, terrifying events that happened when people were completely alone. You'll want to sleep with the lights on after hearing these. So, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with your friends. And of course, click the bell icon to make sure you don't miss our next scary tale. Let's get started. Story 1. The noises in the walls. Sophia had always relished the idea of spending time alone in her home. A young woman in her early 20s, living in a quaint old house on the outskirts of town, she felt a sense of freedom whenever her parents left for the weekend. They had a tradition of taking short getaways. And each time they did, Sophia was left to her own devices. The house was cozy, filled with old furniture and the smell of wood that came from its aging beams. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the creaky floors always provided a nostalgic comfort. This time, her parents were going on a trip for the weekend, and Sophia couldn't wait for the quiet time. Her phone buzzed with a few texts, but she quickly turned it off, enjoying the stillness that surrounded her. The first few hours of being home alone were exactly what Sophia expected. She went through her routine, making tea, flipping through some books, and even taking a short nap on the couch. The evening crept in slowly, the sun setting behind the trees in the backyard. The house was quiet, too quiet. At some point, the stillness started to feel uncomfortable, as though the silence was thickening around her. She shook the feeling off, dismissing it as nothing more than a product of her imagination. However, as night fell and the darkness of the house settled in, things began to change. The soft murmurs of the wind outside could no longer mask the creeping sensation of unease. Sophia sat up from her couch, her eyes scanning the room. That's when she first heard it, a faint scratching sound, like the scuttling of small claws along the walls. She froze, her heart pounding. It wasn't the wind or the house settling. This sound was deliberate, slow, and persistent. She turned up the volume on the TV to drown it out, but it didn't help. The scratching only grew louder, more pronounced. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Mice, perhaps? A rat? But no, she hadn't seen any signs of pests around the house. The scratching came from a spot near the corner of the living room wall, just beside the window. It wasn't a random sound. It was rhythmic, almost like a tapping or scratching at intervals. She pushed the blanket aside and stood, her legs feeling like lead as she walked towards the wall. Her breath hitched when the scratching stopped abruptly as she approached, as though it knew she was coming. She hesitated, looking around the room. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just the worn, creaky floorboards and the flickering shadows from the streetlights outside. Still, she couldn't shake the eerie feeling. Sophia backed away from the wall and sat down again, her mind racing. The more she tried to convince herself it was just an animal, the more she couldn't deny how unnatural the noise sounded. It wasn't sporadic or random. It was systematic. And then it started again. The scratching, louder this time, followed by something that sounded like a soft, low whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Help me. Please, help me." Sophia's blood ran cold. The voice sounded weak, desperate, like someone, or something, was trapped. Her heart hammered in her chest as she stood again, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She moved toward the wall, her hand reaching out for the light switch. As she flicked the switch, the lights flickered, casting shadows on the wall. She could hear the sound of scratching again, followed by a thud, as if something heavy had fallen from within the wall. Her breath caught in her throat. The whisper had stopped, replaced by a thumping noise, slow and rhythmic like something, or someone, was moving behind the wall. Sophia's mind raced. She thought about the history of the house, but she couldn't recall any disturbing details. She had always heard rumours from the neighbours about odd occurrences in the area, but she'd always brushed them off as silly superstitions. Now, standing in front of the wall, she felt an intense unease seep into her bones. The feeling that something was watching her, waiting for her to make the next move, was almost overwhelming. The house seemed alive in a way she had never felt before. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the noises were no longer coming from just one wall. They echoed from all sides, scratching, tapping, whispering. Desperate to get away from it, Sophia ran upstairs, hoping to escape the maddening sounds, but when she reached the hallway, the noises followed her. They were everywhere. She was no longer alone in the house. The walls, once a comforting part of her home, had become a prison. The scratching continued, growing louder as though something, or someone, was trying to claw its way out from behind the walls. Sophia tried to distract herself by calling her parents, but the phone line went dead the moment she picked up the receiver. The silence that followed was deafening. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end as the temperature in the room dropped, a chill creeping through the air. The scratching stopped for a moment, and then came the sound of something shuffling above her. Slowly, she looked up at the ceiling. Her eyes widened as she saw a shadow move across the surface of the wall. There was no way to explain it, no rational explanation for what she was seeing. In a panic, she bolted from the house, not even bothering to grab her shoes. She ran out into the night, her mind racing with fear. She didn't know where she was going, but she had to get away. She didn't stop until she reached her friend's house, where she spent the rest of the weekend, too terrified to even think about going back. Weeks later, after much prodding from her parents, Sophia reluctantly returned home. But the house was different. There was a lingering, suffocating presence about it, as if something was watching her from the corners of every room. Her parents had heard the rumours too and decided to do some research on the house's history. They found out that the previous owners had suffered a terrible loss. The wife, pregnant with their child, had mysteriously disappeared years before. The husband, distraught, had sealed off parts of the house, convinced that his wife was still trapped within the walls. The eerie whispers and scratching were never fully explained, but it was said that the house had always been alive in some way, alive with the echoes of those who had suffered there. Sophia never truly felt alone in the house again. The noises in the walls never stopped. They were a constant reminder of the secrets that lived within the bones of the old house, secrets that she would never fully understand. Story 2. Home Alone, The Whispering House. Emma Carter, a 32-year-old graphic designer, lived alone in a quiet neighborhood in Connecticut. Her house, 421 Maple Drive, was old but charming, with creaking floors and a fireplace she rarely used. On that cold October night, Emma sat on her couch with her laptop, finishing a freelance project. Empty coffee mugs surrounded her. When the clock on her phone turned 11:58 p.m., she received a message from her mother reminding her to lock the doors before bed. Smiling softly, Emma replied that she always did. The night outside was still except for the occasional gust of wind that rattled the windows. She stretched, shut her laptop, and headed to the kitchen for water. As the clock struck midnight, a faint whisper brushed through the air, so soft she almost thought she imagined it. It sounded like a woman's voice exhaling her name. Emma froze, glancing around the dim kitchen. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the clock. She shook her head, muttering that she'd had too much caffeine, and started toward her bedroom. As she climbed the stairs, she adjusted a crooked photo of her late father hanging on the wall. When she straightened it, she heard that whisper again, closer now, just behind her shoulder. It said her name more clearly this time. Emma. Her heart skipped. She turned quickly, her eyes scanning the narrow hallway. No one was there. The heater hummed softly, and the shadows were still. She forced a shaky laugh, whispering to herself, "Get a grip." Inside her bedroom, she turned on the light and stopped short. For a split second, she saw a dark shadow dart across the floor. Her stomach dropped, and she quickly looked around, checking under the bed and opening the closet door. Nothing. "Too much work," she mumbled, climbing into bed. She scrolled through her phone until her eyelids grew heavy. That was when she heard it. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks coming from downstairs. At first she thought it might be the wind, but when it came again, thud, 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 she knew it wasn't. Her throat went dry. "Who's there?" she shouted, but no one answered. She grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs, her bare feet silent on the wooden steps. The knocking stopped. Her heart thudded in her chest as she looked through the peephole. The porch light flickered in the wind, but no one stood there. She unlatched the chain and opened the door a few inches, letting in a rush of cold air. The street was empty. Just when she exhaled in relief, a whisper came right beside her ear. So close, she felt the breath of it. "Don't let them in." Emma gasped and slammed the door shut. Her hands shook violently. When she turned around, she saw something on the wall, a dark handprint smeared across the wallpaper. It looked like soot. When she touched it, it was warm. Her breathing quickened. She needed to call someone, but her phone had no signal. As she paced, trying to calm down, a picture frame suddenly fell from a shelf, shattering on the floor. She jumped back and realized it was her father's photo. Behind it, taped to the wall, was an old folded newspaper clipping. She peeled it off and unfolded it carefully. The headline read, "Local family found dead in Maple Drive home, 1987. Her eyes widened as she stared at the black and white photograph of her house. The article mentioned whispers, a mother's claim that someone lived inside the walls, and a tragic family murder. The clipping slipped from her hands. Then came a creak. She looked up the stairs and froze. Footprints were forming on the carpet one by one, moving slowly down toward her. Invisible feet pressing into the fabric. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She whispered, "Oh God," as the footsteps stopped halfway down. The air thickened. The next words she heard were not in her head. A whisper drifted from the top step. "We never left." Her flashlight trembled in her grip. Every instinct told her to run, but something pulled her toward the basement door instead. The one place she had never gone since moving in. She opened it, and a wave of rotten air rolled out, damp, mouldy, and metallic. She descended slowly, each wooden step creaking beneath her. The flashlight beam wavered over dusty furniture, cobwebs, and old boxes. Then it caught something carved into the concrete wall, strange circular symbols and words she didn't recognize. Just beside the carvings was a small wooden door, half hidden behind an old shelf, no larger than a doghouse. She knelt and touched it. The wood felt wet. Suddenly, something slammed against it from the inside. Emma screamed and stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. It rolled on the floor, flickering wildly. In that flicker of light, she saw 2 pale hands pushing from behind the small door. She scrambled up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind her. Her chest heaved as she backed into the living room. The television turned on by itself, showing nothing but static. Through the haze of black and white, she saw her own reflection, but behind her reflection stood a woman, pale, drenched, with long dark hair and hollow eyes, smiling. Emma spun around, but the room was empty. When she looked back, the TV shut off, plunging the room into darkness. Then came the whispers again, dozens of voices this time, layered and echoing from every wall. "You opened the door," they hissed. "You let us out." Frost crept across the windows. The air turned icy. Her breath came out in clouds. She bolted to the front door, grabbed the handle and yanked. It didn't move. The locks clicked shut on their own. 1, 2, 3, 4. The house was locking her in. She screamed, banging the wood until her fists hurt. "Let me out," the house answered in whispers. "Stay with us." Panicking, she ran down the hallway as the light bulbs above her burst one by one. She reached for the photo of her father. It had fallen again. But this time, the reflection in the cracked glass wasn't hers. It was the pale woman from the TV standing right behind her. Emma spun, flashlight trembling. No one there. Slowly, she turned the frame over again. The reflection smiled at her and raised a hand. Behind Emma, the air shimmered like heat. She ran into her bedroom and slammed the door, locking it. Her phone flickered to life. 1% battery left. She grabbed it desperately. A message popped up from an unknown number. "She's behind you." Emma's hand went limp. The phone dropped to the floor. She turned her head slowly, her heart hammering. There was no one. Only the window. Rain pounded against the glass. She stepped closer and peered at her reflection, but in the reflection stood another figure inside the room with her, the woman again, face grey, mouth open impossibly wide, eyes like empty holes. Emma screamed as the woman lunged. The storm ended some time after that. The neighbourhood was silent again. If anyone had passed by 421 Maple Drive that night, they might have noticed the lights flickering once before going out. By morning, the house was still. Inside, Emma's laptop glowed faintly on the living room table. On its screen was the project she had been designing, a digital family portrait. But now, instead of one person, it showed 4. Emma was there, smiling blankly beside a woman and 2 shadowy children. From somewhere deep within the walls, a whisper drifted softly through the empty house. "She's home now." Story 3. The Haunted Babysitter. Samantha had always been a responsible, level-headed teenager. At just 17, she was used to babysitting for her neighbours, the Donovans, who lived in a large old Victorian house at the end of their street. The house had always intrigued her. It was beautiful, yet it had an air of mystery about it, with its ivy-covered walls and windows that seemed to peer out at you in the dead of night. It wasn't a place that anyone would consider haunted, but Samantha had always felt there was something slightly off about it. Nevertheless, she was familiar with the family and their 2 young children, Oliver and Ellie, and she knew the house well. So when Mr. and Mrs. Donovan asked her to babysit for the evening, she agreed without hesitation, confident she would be fine. It was a typical Friday night when Samantha arrived at the Donovan house. The parents were heading out to a charity event, and they had promised to return by midnight. The children were already asleep by the time Samantha arrived, so she took a moment to get comfortable in the living room, settling onto the couch with a book. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. She had been there countless times before, so the familiarity of it made her feel at ease. Still, as the night wore on, there was an odd chill in the air, a coldness that seemed to settle over her like a heavy blanket. Samantha tried to ignore it, telling herself it was nothing more than the old house settling into the night. It wasn't long before she noticed that the house seemed unnaturally still. Even though it was late, she would have expected to hear the usual creaks of the house, the occasional rattle of a window, or the soft rustle of wind outside. But tonight, everything was too quiet, almost unnervingly so. The silence in the house was thick and suffocating, and no matter how hard she tried to focus on her book or the music playing softly on her phone, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her unease grew when she heard a soft noise coming from upstairs. At first it sounded like a child's soft footsteps, but when she listened more closely, it was clear that no child was awake. The noise wasn't consistent. It came in bursts, 2 or 3 steps, then a pause, then a few more. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She knew both Oliver and Ellie were fast asleep in their rooms, so who was walking around upstairs? Cautiously, she stood up and made her way toward the stairs, her eyes scanning the dimly lit hallway. The house was eerily still now, and the soft creaks of the wood beneath her feet seemed to echo through the silence. She reached the foot of the stairs and listened intently. The noise stopped abruptly, and for a moment she convinced herself she had imagined it. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe the house was just shifting with age. But before she could turn back, the sound started again. This time it was accompanied by a low, almost imperceptible whisper. "Samantha." Her blood ran cold. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It sounded as though it was coming from the top of the stairs. It wasn't a child's voice, nor did it sound like anyone she recognized. The whisper echoed in her ears, making her spine tingle. She knew she should go up there and check, but a wave of terror washed over her. Something told her not to, something that told her to stay away from that part of the house. But as if drawn by some invisible force, Samantha slowly began climbing the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she reached the landing at the top of the stairs, she froze. The hallway stretched out before her, dark and silent. The door to Oliver's room was slightly ajar, and from within she could hear faint sounds of movement. Her breath caught in her throat. She pushed open the door slowly, expecting to find Oliver or Ellie stirring in their sleep. But the room was empty. The bed was made, the toys were neatly arranged in the corner, and there was no sign of either child. Her eyes narrowed in confusion, and she stepped farther into the room. That's when she noticed it. There was something in the corner of the room, something that hadn't been there before. A chair, positioned in front of the window, facing away from her. It was an old wooden rocking chair that belonged to the Donovans' grandmother. Samantha had seen it countless times in the corner of the room, but tonight it was rocking, slowly, rhythmically, back and forth. The chair creaked as it moved, but there was no one sitting in it. Samantha's heart pounded in her chest, and she found herself unable to look away. Her legs felt like lead, but she couldn't bring herself to move. She tried to call out, to say something to break the tension, but her voice caught in her throat. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it, a shadow moving across the room. At first, it was just a flicker, like a trick of the light, but as she turned her head, the shadow grew larger, darker. It was the unmistakable shape of a person standing at the door, its outline shrouded in darkness. Samantha gasped, her body frozen with fear. The shadow seemed to shift and move, growing more defined as it crept closer to her. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, and the room seemed to close in on her. Suddenly the whisper came again, louder this time, clear as day. "Leave. Now." Samantha spun around, but the room was empty once more. The shadow had vanished, and the chair was still rocking back and forth, creaking eerily in the silence. Panic surged through Samantha as she bolted from the room and ran downstairs, her mind racing. She grabbed her phone from the couch and tried to call Mr. Donovan, but the call wouldn't go through. The line was dead. She tried again, but still no answer. In a blind panic, she grabbed her things and fled the house, not stopping until she reached her own home. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear, and she couldn't shake the image of the shadowy figure standing in the doorway. The next day, Samantha told her parents what had happened. They were concerned, but chalked it up to her imagination running wild. But when she returned to the Donovan house the next evening to pick up her paycheck, Mrs. Donovan casually mentioned the history of the house. Apparently, it was built over an old cemetery, and several of the previous owners had reported strange occurrences. The most unsettling part? A former nanny, who had once cared for the children, had mysteriously disappeared years ago. No one had ever found her, and rumours suggested that she had become lost in the house, never leaving. Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that she had encountered something in the house that night, something that wasn't just a figment of her imagination. She never returned to babysit for the Donovans again. But even now, years later, she could still hear the whisper in the dark. Leave now.